Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to put some faces to these species that we've been talking about, and we'll go over some of the main ideas, the concepts, the features associated with all of the hominins in our evolutionary tree. So let's start out with differentiating us between some of the hominids. So when you use the word hominid in science, this is referring to great apes. And it's important to remember that we are great apes, along with gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, the gibbons, but also some of the older species, for example, Gigantopithecus. Now, the thing is, while all hominins are hominids, not all hominids are hominins. Okay, so that sounds confusing. So, for example, a great ape would be a chimpanzee, and another great ape would be a human. Now, only a human is a hominin. A chimpanzee is not a hominid. Both are hominids. So, reflecting on this term hominin, what we want to keep in mind is a hominin is a human or closely related ancestor. So, for example, Homo habilis we'll be talking about. That's a hominin because it fits into our own evolutionary tree. It's believed to be a species that led to us. Okay, it's a good thing that we're not required to pronounce this in class. Sahelanthropus tchadensis. Actually, that just kind of rolls off of the tongue. Sahelanthropus tchadensis. Yeah, no, it doesn't. Okay, this species, it's dated to 7 million years. That's the age of the fossils. And again, perhaps there are older remains. Like I said, when we look at these species and we talk about their age, that's only based upon the evidence that we have currently. We do know that it existed in the Miocene, so that geological epoch that we use to help establish a chronology. And it was discovered in 2001 in Central Africa. Okay, so this is kind of cool. Central Africa in Chad. And that's cool because normally when we're looking at our species, those hominins, the ones that connect us together, they're found in Eastern Africa around the Awash Valley, the Rift Valley, and down in South Africa. So this is an outlier, and it may represent a species in a habitat where some of that speciation was taking place between our ancestors and the ancestors of chimpanzees. When we look at the foramen magnum, right, that foramen magnum, that provides us with insight into the way that this species moved or locomoted. I'm going to put little dots here, make it easier for us to see. It provides evidence into the way that species locomoted, and this is important because it illustrates bipedalism. And I'm going to put an asterisk here, postural. Okay, so it is not a habitual biped. It likely spent a lot of time in the trees, and this is what it looks like. We call it tumai. That makes Sahelanthropus tchadensis a little bit easier. Tumai, it means hope of life. Okay, and this species represents one of the oldest known potential ancestors in the human lineage. Here we have the fragmentary remains pieced back together of Ardipithecus ramidus. If you're wondering about the terms where these words come from, if they sound made up, they are. Anthropologists, after they discover them, they're the ones that get to name them. And typically it's a combination of Latin, Greek, and the local names, language. So here, Afar language. Ardipithecus ramidus. It is traced to about 4.5 million years of age, which places it in the, yes, if you were thinking the Pliocene, you are absolutely correct. As for its cranial capacity, it's around that 350 cubic centimeter mark, and a postural biped. Again, there is substantial evidence for the fact that it did have features for bipedalism. However, it had a small body. It's got a grasping foot with this divergent big toe hallux for climbing. This does represent a fairly critical stage in evolution. It allows us to begin to piece together what was taking place in around that Pliocene, and especially after the climate change that had been taking place in the Miocene. We had the drying trend. So Ardipithecus ramidus, here's a reconstruction of what it would look like. The nickname is Ardi. This Ardipithecus ramidus, it's actually translated into floor root ape. So root is a ape that's leading to us, and Ardi meaning floor, ground. So that's how the terms come about. So this would have speciated, arguably, from earlier species, and now is beginning to speciate into the next genus. Okay, so we're moving into the Australopithecine group. Australopithecus means the southern ape. It's a type of hominin, and it's a misnomer because they're not just found in southern regions. That's the first region that they were found. Now we find them throughout eastern and southern Africa. Australopithecus anamensis. This particular fossil would date to probably about 4 million years before the present, which places it in the Pliocene. Okay, and this species shows evidence of bipedalism. We see those changes that have taken place, for example, on the nuchal crest to allow us to assess neck muscles, the foramen magnum, and brain size. Yeah, it's pitifully small. Anamensis is about 450 cc's, again the size of a chimpanzee. The teeth in the jaw on these individuals, we don't have it here, but they indicate a primarily plant-based diet. You know, other food stuff is going to get in there, and that's an important distinction to make. What is the main diet? And of course, other food gets into what we are normally eating. I'm sure that some animals may have made it into their mouths, into their guts, but that wasn't the main source. So Australopithecus anamensis, so anamensis, again, this is a constructed word. Anam, in the Turkana language, it means lake. So this is a species that was named after the fossils that were discovered around Lake Turkana, a lake, Anam. So you get Australopithecus, Anam, anamensis. Yeah, I know we're making up names, but scientists get to do that. They get to make up names. Shakespeare got to make up names. So what? Words. Why can't we make up words and they become things, real things? They are real things. Anyhow, lived in a variety of habitats, and as pointed out, it is a biped, and it is also a habitual. Yeah. Anything else I want to say about this? Yeah, they would have lived alongside of the Ardipithecines and also a whole slew of other Australopithecines that emerge. And now we have Australopithecus afarensis. Australopithecus afarensis. There's always a time frame that we're finding these within. I'm going to say 3.5 MYA on average, places it in the Pliocene. But again, the fossils date to about 3.9 million years of age to about 2.9 million years of age, meaning that there's a range of fossils quite possibly became extinct by 2.9 million years of age. But then again, just because we don't have or we haven't found the fossils to suggest that they lived past that time frame doesn't mean that they didn't. Again, we're theorizing and working with the material that we have. Brain size, it's going to be a little bit bigger. I'm going to say about 400 cc's. And again, there's always a range that we're going to find there. The individual that I'm thinking about, first I'll go up here with the nomenclature with the genus. Again, it's the southern ape, and this is of the Afar region. And sometimes there's nicknames individuals give the species that they find. For example, we had talked about Ardi, and here we have an individual that's referred to as Lucy. So there we go. We've got Lucy, and she doesn't look too happy about the picture. Lucy shouldn't be happy. Lucy, the evidence suggests a few things, and people argue about this, but we're going to go with that she fell out of a tree and fell to her death. The way that anthropologists get at that is by applying some of the techniques that we would use in forensic anthropology or any area that's looking at human osteology. There's a number of green stick fractures, comminuted fractures, which would suggest a serious fall. Some people have said trampled by a stampede of something. Yes, so Lucy is not a happy hominin. We don't need to put that in our notes, but we can. Just for the heck of it, let's have fun. Not a happy. It's not a happy hominin. Who said we can't have fun with anthropology? So Lucy, this southern ape of the Afar region, or southern Afar ape, this individual is a fully bipedal species. It was discovered in the 1980s. I'll fix that. By an individual by the name of Donald Johansen. His team researched this, excavated and researched the individual, and they called it Lucy because, and I was talking about nicknames, because apparently when they had made the discovery, they were listening to the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And there's all kinds of questions and theories that could be, that would emerge out of that. Yeah, anyhow. Let's move away from that. So we have long arms, we have some curved fingers with the fossils, which would suggest they did take advantage of the trees, and that's going to make sense because they are not a strong species. They are they're food. There's other individuals out there that are going to be predators and looking for these Australopithecines, the tasty Australopithecines, perhaps. And they were adapted to the savanna. So we've talked about thermal regulatory theory and the savanna hypothesis. If you want to learn more about the savanna hypothesis in comparison to the woodland hypothesis, which I don't talk about, for me, the savanna hypothesis makes more sense, so that's the one I use. I'll acknowledge the other one, and if you want to research it, you can, but there is a video on the savanna hypothesis that I've posted. So probably a variety of habitats being adapted to the savanna here, and a mixed up diet, including fruits, leaf, probably thinking some meat again. Here we have excellent evidence for habitual bipedalism. And taken alongside of other evidence that we have from about 3.5 million years. For example, Mary Leakey, she had discovered the Laetoli footprints in Africa, and they're dated to roughly the same period. We're able to say that clearly these hominins had become habitual bipeds, and were using it in a manner to exploit resources at the most dangerous periods of the day. Right, Australopithecus garhi. So these genus Australopithecines should be rolling off the tongue by now. And Australopithecus garhi, our fossils date to about 2.5 million years of age, which places us on the border of the Pliocene and the, yes, you're correct, the Pleistocene. All right, so we have the border of the Pliocene, Pleistocene here. As for cranial capacity, it's increasing in size, 450 cubic centimeters. But here we do see that type of long, slow, gradual evolution that Charles Darwin had talked about. And that's going to change soon, because he wasn't entirely correct on that. Either way, here we have, again, another habitual biped. And this could be said for a lot of these Australopithecines, and as discussed, there are a variety of Australopithecines. The ones that we are looking at are, this is a very limited model. We could spend an entire week going through all of the different names and species, and we're not interested in doing that. So here we have larger teeth, larger jaws, really, and something like that suggests, it does make a suggestion, because in class we had talked about the nuchal crest, for example, and how that can be used to infer the size of the neck muscles, the location, the orientation of neck muscles. The same goes for the glutes, for example, and the hamstrings. When we're looking at the pelvic girdle, here larger teeth, this is really suggesting a diet that's focused on tough plant material, so eating heavier plants. Now, Australopithecus garhi, this is southern ape surprise. That's what it means. And anthropologists were surprised because there seems to be evidence of tool, at least use with respect to stone tools. The question is whether or not they were actually modifying stone tools in the same way as the next species that we're going to talk about. So we do have possible evidence of tools in association with the species, which really would mark a very important step, change in the way that we think about our evolution, because tool use has always been associated with the Homo genus. So we think that this is a possible ancestor of later Homo species. All right, so here are some of the fossil remains for Homo habilis. Homo habilis is in the time frame of about 2.4 million years of age, therefore it places it in the Pleistocene. And the brain size, it's increasing quite significantly. 600 cubic centimeters from that 450 cubic centimeters. That's a large change. That's a significant change. As for the name, Homo habilis, this means the handy person, or the handy human. In here I've provided us with O62 or OH62 as one of the representatives. So we have the tool tradition that we refer to as the Oldowan tool tradition, because it was found in Olduvai Gorge. And here we have clear evidence of manufacturing tools. Therefore, the Paleolithic has begun at this point of state. So we have the Stone Age. All right, so yeah, one of the things that we do is we break time into, for example, eons, eras, periods. Oh, there we go, a period or epoch. And then eventually we have our ages, so they're smaller than an epoch. So this is when the Stone Age begins, and we move through a number of different Stone Ages. For example, we have the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, the Neolithic, and then we move into a new type of age after that. We move into the Bronze Age, and then we move into the Iron Age. And then we start to move into different sets of time. But either way, this is Homo habilis. This is OH62, one of the handy humans. They were fully bipedal, and they were an African species. Okay, so with respect to Homo habilis, there's also another species. If you're want to look further into anthropology and our phylogenetic tree, there's also Homo rudolfensis, and in around Homo erectus we have Homo ergaster. But here we're just focusing on the simplified model, and we have Homo erectus. Homo erectus appears in the fossil record. And again, I'm being very careful about that, and note that it appears in the fossil record. That doesn't mean that it wasn't around earlier. This is when we have fossil evidence for the existence of Homo erectus. So making these connections between, for example, Homo habilis and Homo erectus, it is theoretical. So that's that element of evolutionary theory when we think about the macro or the big picture. The things that we can't actually observe or test, for example. But when it comes to microevolution, the changes that we can see, or the changes in allele frequency that take place between populations, see the emergence of a new feature, for example. And we've had this in more recent times, skin pigment, that's not that old. Changes in eye color, the different alleles that are there, or even if we look at bacteria and viruses, we see that change is taking place, and it works according to that evolutionary model. So on the micro perspective, yes, we can observe evolution, and it is factual. But when it comes to these larger connections that we're trying to make, this is theoretical. Homo erectus, so 2 million years ago, that places it in the Pleistocene. All right, there we go. We've got it in the Pleistocene. And here we're looking at the remains of a species. And there's a lot of these Homo erectus, the fully upright human. And we're looking at an individual called Bodo. Bodo, I think, is interesting because here we have evidence potentially for cannibalism, maybe ritualistic cannibalism, or just that other Homo erecti were hungry and thought Bodo might taste good. Either way, that's yeah, what they do is all right. We practice cultural relativism here. Homo erectus is important on a number of levels. It's a biped. That goes out without saying. It's a hominin, so it's using tools. It's also innovating with respect to those tools, and that tells us that significant cognitive change is taking place. So with Homo erectus, we're seeing a brain size, and I'm going to go here with an average around 900 cubic centimeters. So we'll go up approximately 900, some situations lower, some situations higher. The tool tradition that's becoming more complex because they're making a biface, and we'll talk about this in another lecture. The Julian tradition, sometimes called Mode 2, the Odawan tradition being mode 1. This is represented by what's called a biface. So instead of just chipping rock off, they've decided to retool those. They've figured that out. And that tells us that something different has taken place in their brain where they can abstract a little bit more. Now, here's where it gets, I think, even more interesting. You know, all animals run from fire. And if you're thinking, no, rhinos don't, they stamp it out, stomp it out, that's absolutely false. Rhinos run from fire as well. This particular species obviously didn't, because it is associated, fossil remains, butchering sites, with fire. And not only was it using this fire, for example, for warmth, but we also have a feature that distinguishes us from every other species on the earth. This is what makes us unique. It's not just that we use fire, we've harnessed fire, is that we cooked with it. And that changed the entire course of human evolution. And I will post something on cooking and how that's changed over time, and maybe even cover some of modern cooking in my kitchen. Anyhow, it's harnessed fire. And with fire, it's able to migrate. And it migrates absolutely everywhere. So while this is an African species, it migrates throughout the old world. It doesn't move into the new world. You know, there might be something popping up in, I believe, South America, and I'll take a look into some of that research. I remember reading a paper or seeing a headline where they have found some bones which appear to have marks on them that would suggest that they've been manipulated or modified by humans, and it's placing into the hundreds of thousands of years. That would mean, if that was the case, that one of our older hominins, pre-Homo sapiens sapiens, us, had made it to the Americas. So here we have mastery of fire for cooking and warmth. We have the association of the Acheulean tradition, hand axes and cleavers, social groups. And I think the other thing that's really important here, they're tall, that's important. They're runners. They've become apex hunters. But the other thing is, again, what's taken place in the brain, not just the abstraction, but the patience that would be needed to engage in cooking and plan that out. Okay, so here we have Bodo. Unfortunately, Bodo was somebody's food, but either way, this is an example of the fully upright human, Homo erectus. All right, and Homo heidelbergensis, Homo, human, and named after a region where the first remains were discovered in Germany. Homo heidelbergensis is a species that's dated to approximately 0.6 MY. If we converted this, we're going to say 600,000 years. YBP, because, YBP, before the present, years before the present. They became extinct around 200,000 years ago, according to the fossil record, and they lived in Europe, Africa, and there seems to be evidence that they were in Asia as well. The brain size of this individual significantly different from Homo erectus. So now we're seeing some really fast changes, rapid changes that are taking place in the human brain. We look at, and I'm just going to use this section here to compare and contrast. If we look at Homo habilis at 600 cc's, and then we move to Homo erectus at approximately 900 cc's, you know, and these are significant changes that are taking place within hundreds of thousands of years. And the only thing that we can attribute this to is number one, the incorporation of meat into the diet, and then cooking the meat, which denatures protein and begins to really work very differently in the human body. And I'll cover that when we get to cooking. Homo heidelbergensis, its brain size, we're looking at, I'm going to go here with an average, about 1,200 cubic centimeters. So we will see some lower end cranial capacity there, some higher end cranial capacity. What this is telling us is that it is quite similar to humans, with the exception that, and if you look at the remains, you know, and imagine the way the brain is going to look inside of that skull, it's kind of got a football shape, American football. So it has an American football shape. It doesn't have that European football shape, which our brain does. Our brain has become more globular, and there are significant changes in the human brain that take place. And I'll do something on the human brain as well, and the changes that have taken place over time in specific regions. Either way, we've got a big brain here. It's using fire, sophisticated tool use. So we're seeing developments on that Acheulean tradition. Shelter. Okay, where there's shelter, there's fire for warmth, fire for cooking, and you know there seems to be some evidence for burial practices that might be indicative of ritual. And you know this is really important in the archaeological record, because when we find grave goods, we find markings that would indicate repetitive behavior. That's going to tell us something about the emergence of supernatural thinking. Again, if we connect that to the brain and human behavior, that tells us that radical things are taking place. And what we should be asking is why? Anyhow, here we have Kabwabwi, the Heidelberg human. So, like I said, found absolutely everywhere. Kabwe would be a skull that was found in Broken Hill in Africa. And yeah, that's about all I have to say on this one. We'll come back to some of these themes later on. Now, here we have the Neanderthal. Some people say Neanderthal. They pronounce that TH. The H is silent in German, so we don't say Thal, we say Neanderthal. And I believe the H has been dropped from the German alphabet, but we retain it for scientific purposes. Anyhow, Neanderthals, sometimes they are classified as Homo sapiens. Okay, I'm going to do the whole line below this. Neanderthali and Homo sapiens neanderthaliensis, meaning that this is a member of not only our genus, the Homo genus, but the sapiens species, and a subspecies of the Homo sapiens species. Now, there's debate about that. Some people argue that they are simply Homo sapiens, and we're looking at some of the phenotypical differences that do exist between populations. And if we look at populations today, there are clear differences between, for example, people that have adapted to life in the Canadian subarctic, the Yupik and the Inuit, and people who have adapted to life in the hottest regions of the world, for example, the Maasai in Africa. And it's possible that we're looking at the one species, and yeah, we're perhaps creating a subspecies that doesn't necessarily need to be there. Either way, the Neanderthal, it was originally discovered in Germany, and it got its brutish associations with it there's a story that when they had discovered it, they said, whose skull does this belong to? And the response was, well, it must be Napoleonic soldiers because they look so different. And it was meant to be an insult. And eventually this turned into this dumb kind of caveman idea. And Neanderthals were nowhere near being dumb. So we're looking at about 4.4 MYA, or 400,000 years before the present, and they become extinct around 40 to 30,000 years ago. And there's a variety of theories. Some people believe that when they encountered us, Homo sapiens, we killed them off. We battled. People like this idea of fighting. The evidence just isn't there for that theory. What we do know is humans, us, interbred with these humans, them. So there is this, I don't like to say interbreeding, because if we're the same species or subspecies, it's just breeding. But we could say geographic or regional interbreeding, not to suggest that there's a difference in some sort of ancestral breeding. Either way, this is a European and Middle Eastern species. It's adapted to cold environments. As for the brain size, we're looking at, I'm going to go with an average here, 1,450 cc's. This individual had a huge brain. The lower end, we see about 1,200 cc's. Higher end, we see about 1,750 cc's. So that's very similar, and in many situations larger than modern humans. So the Neanderthal, like I said, found in Europe. It's found in the Middle East. Here we have Nandi, which was discovered in the Shandidar caves in Iraq. In the Zagros Mountains. The Shandidar caves and regions around there have yielded a lot of Neanderthals. So too has Spain, England, Germany. Like I said, but there's a lot here. We'll talk about Nandi a little bit later on, maybe if you check out some of the material in the health and healing section if you're interested, because here we do appear to have evidence not only of burials and supernatural thinking, but also evidence for care and compassion. Nandi was an individual that was paralyzed early at birth and lived into old age, not birth, sorry, early in life, but did live into old age. And in that type of environment, you would have certainly needed a whole lot of care. Either way, skilled tool makers. And here we have something called the Mousterian tool tradition, sometimes referred to as Mode 3. And it's more complicated than, obviously, Mode 2. Here with these species, we're probably hafting now. Rocks to sticks and spears are emerging. Complex social structures, as pointed out, they cared for injured and elderly individuals. For example, we could have had the old man of La Chapelle here instead of Nandi, but I chose Nandi. Nandi looks cool. Yeah, and more recently, the Nobel Prize in Medicine went to an anthropologist, evolutionary anthropologist, for making the connections between Neanderthal DNA and human DNA and mapping that genome. And we know that we have about 4% of Neanderthal DNA. And like I said, this is important to understanding our evolutionary history and the connections between us. Anyway, back to the story of extinction. I think in all likelihood, if we think about contact between peoples who have never had any experience with each other on an epidemiological or a disease level, coupled with the changes that were taking place during the Pleistocene. I haven't put that in there, but we have that. The last ice age. It's getting darn cold. They're already cold adapted species, but it's getting darn cold, and that coupled with eventually meeting humans somewhere around 90,000 years ago, and that's the most recent evidence that we're seeing, maybe as early as 90,000 in the Middle East, probably about 40,000 in Europe. Perhaps diseases that we carried were passed on to these individuals that did not have experience with diseases that originated, for example, in Africa, in India, in the regions that we had been living for quite some time. And finally, we come to Homo sapiens. And here we have an early or an archaic Homo sapiens. Sometimes we use Homo sapiens sapiens as our nomenclature, as our designation, belonging to the Homo genus, human, wise. So we would be the doubly wise humans that apparently are messing everything up. So one wonders how wise we are. Either way, Homo sapiens sapiens, or archaic Homo sapiens, we've been pushing back the date for some time, watching this take place over the last 10 years. At one point of time, we thought that we were about 100,000 years of age. Now we're pushing this back to 0.3 MYA if we're using a consistent time frame. If we want to convert this, we're looking at about 300,000 years before the present for archaic Homo sapiens. And using that term archaic, what we're saying is that there are still some fundamental differences, and specifically here with the brain. Looking at this individual skull, this skull comes from Morocco. This is Jebel Arud. Okay, so we have Jebel Arud, the wise human, reconstructed. This individual dates to about 300,000 years, that particular fossil. So it's one of the earliest known humans, and we're seeing a mix of, like I said, what's defined as archaic, so maybe that's not the best word. I think perhaps robust features rather than the gracile features that have emerged. So two terms here I'm going to introduce just for the heck of it. Robust, if you haven't come across it. So heavy featured. So, if we look at this individual, we see larger brow ridges than what we would normally see among modern populations. And then we have something called gracile, soft features. And we tend to have softer features, but then again, we still see individuals that have more robust features, which forces us to reflect on what we are looking at. Are we actually looking at differences in species? Are they properly defined as an archaic Homo sapiens? Or can we just say we're seeing change over time and perhaps diversity? To answer that question, I think perhaps the best way to look at it is the brain. And as pointed out, with these earlier species, we're looking at a brain that's really kind of that American football shape versus what we see among modern humans, a more globular brain. Okay, something like that. And the changes that have taken place as a result of that. So Again, we'll talk more about that when it comes to the brain. But either way, here's been the species that we've taken a look at, from Sahelanthropus to Homo sapiens. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care.